I don't want to say anything negative about how Dr. Dodge managed his traumatic stress. But then there were people who were very positive in their descriptions of what happened. There was a steward. His name was Ed Wilton, and he survived to testify during the U.S. Senate inquiry, and his description was very different than Dr. Dodge's. He spoke up for First Officer Murdoch. He said to the Senate inquiry, and this was during a time when, nice things weren't being said about this man, and yet this young steward took it upon himself to speak up for him. He said, I would like to say something about the bravery exhibited by First Officer Murdoch. He was perfectly cool and very calm. And I thought that was really neat that he would, at a time like that, when he was being scrutinized, under oath, that he would stand up and say something very different from these other accounts of Murdoch shooting himself. We'll never know for sure. We will never know. But we do know a lot from Ed Wilton, from what he said, and also because he himself saved a menu. And Ed's menu was a crew menu for the lunch. We don't know which day it was, but it was one of the days, one of the lunches from one of the days. And it was handwritten. It was not printed out on the printing presses that were on board for the passenger menus. Ed had tucked it away, and years later he gave it to his niece, and eventually it ended up in the hands of one of her husband's employees. The main courses were fried sole, there was grilled cutlets, grilled chicken, there was a porterhouse steak, which is a thick cut of beef from the back part of the cow. There was petite maritime, they called it, which is lobster tail, and French fried potatoes. That's what the crew ate. And then there was a special dessert, which is very, popular today, something we see very commonly today. But about 10, 20 years ago, we weren't seeing a whole lot of it. And it's rhubarb, Scott. There was stewed rhubarb and custard. Now, rhubarb is something I always love. I grew up with it, but it's just only recently become trendy. The first rhubarb that was planted in the United States is known to have been the rhubarb that was planted in Philadelphia by John Bartram. He was a Quaker who brought seeds and planted them in the 1730s. And his house and garden is available to go in and visit. The public can go there. And it's likely the spot where the first rhubarb grew in America. So while the rhubarb custard pie has been a long-standing custom in England, rhubarb has only been growing in the United States since the 1700s. England has embraced it long, long before, and very often in the form of like a pudding. They call them fools, F-O-O-L. They're like stewed fruit mixed with custard. And you can enjoy a strawberry fool. There's all sorts of different fruits or berries that are made into these little pudding desserts. And so for our culinary spotlight today, we have a rhubarb custard pie, which is basically custard and stewed fruit, like the Titanic crew would have eaten. And this recipe is for a large pie, but it can be adapted to make hand pies or individual tarts. You can make small little rhubarb tarts for passable desserts for a party or something like that if you want to do a Titanic-themed party, which I think is a really nice idea in honor of the crew. It's just basically rhubarb, eggs, milk, flour, sugar. The recipe calls for a store-bought pie crust because it's a lot easier than making your own pie crust and tastes just as good. So it's a really nice time saver to just go and buy your pie crust. And what I like to do is to split those in half because you get a much thinner pastry crust then, and the thinner, the crispier.
Rhubarb, and I think too, as what its story is, where it has its origins in Asia, and then it comes to England, then it comes to America, this global movement of this plant. It's interesting because it's similar to sort of the global movement in the maritime life of people who would work in Europe, work around the world, these different types of foods and cultures circulating all throughout the place. Rhubarb is really a good example of that.
Yeah, I agree. I loved it when I found that in my research that rhubarb was aboard the Titanic and eaten aboard Titanic, because it's just such a neat ingredient, and I just love to celebrate it. We're seeing it now in everything from cocktails to muffins to you name it. And so I think it's neat to see that it was on the menus aboard the Titanic.
Well, this, like all the other recipes that were featured in our culinary spotlights, can be found on the show notes. This recipe spotlight is available in detail, as are all the other ones and all the other episodes. So you can find them all there. All right. Well, that wraps up our exploration of the past for this episode. As always, I want to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, especially our spy masters, Baron Fraza, Chris from Maine, Carl from Norway, Moondoggy from Ohio, Rick Knowlton, Vic and Irene, Mike from New York, Michelle, and Marlene. I'll explain what that is in a second. If you like the show and want to help it grow, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, like and subscribe to the show on the podcast player of your choice. This helps spread the word about the show. 2, join our Facebook group. Here we can keep the discussion going about new episodes, and you can talk about what you like and didn't like. And you can find this group if you just search for History Unplugged on Facebook. 3, we have an online store with t-shirts, phone covers, and other accessories featuring awesomely bad history puns that were crowdsourced by you, the audience. And you can find that if you go to teespring.com/stores/history-unplugged. That's teespring.com/stores/history-unplugged. 4, and this is really the best way to dive deep with History Unplugged, and that's to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you know your American history, you know the Knowlton's Rangers were an elite spy and reconnaissance group in the American Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the membership program of History Unplugged. You can join at 3 levels. If you join at the level of Scout, you can hear all the episodes of History Unplugged completely ad-free and get early access to new episodes, at least a week early. If you join at the Intelligence Officer level, you get special bonus episodes, like a 10-part series on the World War II hero Audie Murphy, a multi-part series called Ottoman Lives about different people in the Ottoman Empire, and a series called Rendezvous with Death that looks at biographical profiles of Americans who went to fight in World War I before America entered the war. The last level is Spy Master, where you get all that stuff, but you also get 3 hardcover history books, Forging a President, How the Wild West Created Teddy Roosevelt, Race to the Top of the World, Richard Byrd and the First Flight to the North Pole, and The Last Fighter Pilot, the true story of the final combat mission of World War II. Another bonus is, you can choose a history topic for me to focus on for an entire episode that can go up to an hour, and I'll answer whatever question you have for me, and you get a shout out at the end of each episode. If you want to learn how to become a member of the Knowlton's Rangers, go to patreon.com/unplugged. That's patreon.com/unplugged. All right, well, that is all for my spiel. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast, from ancient Greece to the Cold War and everything else in between. See you next time.